PTAD was my way of bringing the community together a little bit, trying to get education to all of us as well as our kids around the subject of drug abuse. With PTAD, we have 3 goals. The first one is providing education to our kids and to our parents about substance abuse. The second is encouraging and procuring healthy decisions, relationships, and confidence for all of our kids. And the third one is to try and help families who may be dealing with the stressors of an addicted loved one and not sure where to turn. Now, again, I'm just a dad. I'm not an expert in any of this. Tonight we've got 4 local leaders that are going to help discuss some of the current issues that they're seeing and also hopefully provide some tips to us and try to understand that as parents and as a community, some of the things that we should and maybe shouldn't be worried about that we may be. So real quick, an intro. First gentleman to my right is Vinny DiMacedo, our local senator. Next to him is Police Chief Rick Wall. We've got Joe McDonald, the head of the Sheriff's Department, and Tim Cruz, the district attorney here. The way that tonight's going to work is I'm going to throw some questions to them and that have been on my mind, and they're going to give their bits. We're also going to do a Q&A with all of you, so there's a microphone to your left over here. If you could just step up and when we get there and ask any questions that you might have of any of us. You probably don't want to hear from me because I don't know much about the subject other than I don't like it. And then after the Q&A, we have Kim Noble here from the Youth Health Connection, who's going to do a presentation of her own. And we also have an exhibit here called Hidden in Plain Sight, which will, for you parents, will be fairly interactive and I think interesting. So after that, please stick around. We have food. We bought a lot more food than there are people here. So please don't let us waste it and come hang out. The speakers will be there as well if you're shy on the microphone. So I'd like to just start with Vinny, with you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the substance abuse initiatives at the state level? What's been on your mind lately dealing with this? I know we just had a chance to catch up a little bit about it. It was something that is not a new issue, but seems like it's got a lot of attention within the last couple of years, if you don't mind.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, and it's people like yourselves that are bringing light to this issue, and frankly, getting the education out there, because I think that the most important thing that we can do is get the word out there about what is happening. I'd say maybe 2 or 3 years ago, people weren't talking about this. This was not on the front of everyone's minds, but it wasn't talked about in the press. It wasn't talked about around kitchen tables. Now it's all you hear about. And the sad reason is because it's happening every day to your neighbors, to your friends, your brothers, your sisters. And it's really, become what I call an epidemic. And when you have an epidemic, you have to do whatever it takes to tackle that epidemic. It is the most important issue that we are going to be dealing with, in my personal opinion, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the 3 men to my right are really at the forefront of this issue because they're the ones that are dealing with this day to day, and they're hearing the horror stories, seeing them firsthand. And I just only anecdotally over a period of time have understood more and more the challenges that we face. And this is a multifaceted issue. There are so many ways that whether you deal with it through the judicial system, you deal with it through addressing the prescription drugs getting out there, or you deal with it through education. There's a whole host of different ways to deal with it. I have tried to focus personally on the education aspect of it because I just think if we can get people to understand how dangerous these drugs are and what opiate addiction means for the rest of your life, my hope is that at some point they'll realize that I don't want to mess with this. This is a road I don't want to go down. And so to that extent, there are so many different ways to tackle this issue, but I've really focused quite a bit on the area of education, trying to work within the schools to get the schools to talk about this, to get parents to talk about this. I filed a few pieces of legislation that I think might be helpful. I'm not going to go into that in detail because I know you want to hear from the experts to my right, but I want everyone to understand this is as big an issue. When the governor of the Commonwealth spoke, he opened up his State of the State. The one line that resonated with everyone is that he was going to take this opiate issue and tackle it head on. And he literally got a standing ovation from everybody in the room because that's what it takes. And so I suggest that if we as a community come together and work together and tackle this issue head on, regardless of your political affiliation, regardless of if you're involved in politics or not, take this very seriously because it is destroying people's lives and in the best case, altering their lives. And I think that we can beat this. I think if there's enough attention paid to this, my hope is that people will realize how dangerous this is, and those, dirtbag scum, that are selling this to our kids will go elsewhere because people aren't buying it. And that's, I know it's a harsh way to say it, but it's just, it's so significant, and that's why I've been trying and working with these gentlemen to my right and the educators trying to get the word out about how dangerous heroin is. So that's why I wanted to thank Michael for doing this. The fact that it's on cable TV, the fact that we're talking about this is going to continue to make a difference. And I'm seeing this in every community that I've had the privilege of representing. In every community is talking about this and dealing with this in one shape or another. And my hope is, 5-10 years from now, this is not going to be the conversation. But right now it is, and I really believe we can make the difference.
Great. So, Vinny, I just have one follow-up question to that. And prevention is certainly at the forefront of what we're trying to do with this small group in town as well. But it seems like there's a whole host of people that have the issues, right? So there's certainly some punishment involved legally. There's some treatment stuff. What types of discussions are going on regarding the balance of prevention and treatment? Because again, I'll say that I'm focused on prevention, and PTAD is as well, but knowing full well that there's a whole other side to this.
And you're absolutely correct, and because I have three people that have really been dealing with this in that end of it, in addressing people who are addicted, I would leave it for them. But you'll see that we are addressing this. I mean, the governor has put together his opiate task force. Sheriff McDonald's on that. We've got some great leaders who are really trying to address this issue from every facet, and it's prescriptions, what the doctors are putting out, and that's an important issue. It's addressing how we treat these people in our criminal system. When we find out that 75 to 80% of the people that are in jail have some sort of addiction, it starts to say to yourself, well, is it just about punishment or is it about treatment? And the reality is you need the treatment. You need a long-term treatment program to get you the help that you need. And that, frankly, I'll be honest with you, I've had a huge paradigm shift in this area because it is, once you understand the science of addiction, and forgive me because I don't want to go on forever, you start to understand that once you're addicted, this thing owns you, and it's not, hey, I can just pull myself up by my bootstraps. You can't. You need the help. You need people to stand beside you. You need a program. You need to go through that. And my belief is that we can provide that. We need to provide it in a better way. We need to change how we're dealing in hospitals and what doctors are prescribing. There's so many different areas to address, but as I said, I'd like to defer to my colleagues who are dealing with this, and frankly, from a criminal justice point of view, because I think they have had a paradigm shift. When you see, the police chief, the sheriff, the district attorney, and they're talking about helping people, it's not locking people up. That's not the goal here. The goal is to help people get the treatment they deserve to turn their lives around, because I am convinced that people can beat this thing. They can beat it. They can have fruitful lives and make be a benefit to our society. You don't just throw them away and throw them in jail and lock them up. That's not the mentality here. We want to make a difference, and these people are making the difference. They're doing things that you would have never thought a police chief, a sheriff, and a district attorney are doing to help people. And it's a pretty impressive thing when you get an understanding of what our legal system here is doing in Plymouth County. We should all be very proud because they have been on the forefront of addressing this opiate addiction problem.
Great, thanks. Rick, so I'm going to turn it to you. How about just a local update? Foot crimes, any types of crimes that you feel are related, maybe an estimate on the relation to drugs here locally, on what some of that stuff has.
Question?
Oh yeah, that's for you.
I'm a little nervous for being up in front of a crowd here. I thank you all for coming. A lot of the common issues, and being able to be in other people's homes to see beyond the fences and the doors and see what really goes on in the family. Again, I go back to what Senator DiMacedo said, that it affects and can affect any family from any demographics. There are no safe people. And a lot of the crimes that we see are like, it'll start with larcenies. Your jewelry will start disappearing because the addiction is so severe that your good kid will take your jewelry and pawn it just to get their next fix. And I think the change for all of us began when we started to realize this is a health crisis and not a drug issue. And so I go back to what Mike started to say, that we have to take the steps in the very beginning and start with awareness and start with education. We need people to know that of the risks. We need people to know that this can happen in your family. This can happen, you can work hard, you can do all the right things, and it can still happen. Your kids are at risk. This is not the 1970s junkies that we remember from TV, and if you can't imagine, in a student, an athlete going to stick a needle in his arm, and you say, there's no way that could happen. I'm telling you it happens, and it happens all the time.
Great. So I'd like to go back to prevention a little bit, Rick. We've talked about this a lot over the past year or two, just informally, but talk about the importance of the community in prevention efforts for our kids and quite frankly the young adults. That how do you think we can come together to help stem this stuff?
The message I heard from the three people that really got the Pembroke Titans Against Drugs going was, why don't we have a DARE program in the school? Why aren't we talking about this with our kids? We can do it at home, but we need to do it. You need that credibility, from law enforcement. You need credibility from the coaches. We need that one message for all the people. Well, back in the 80s, we got a lot of grant money, and we were doing community policing grants. We were putting on DARE programs. We had DARE grants and everything else. Over the last several years, with the economy the way it was, the grants have dried up. So we haven't been able to do that. And again, we kind of lost sight of there being a health issue with drugs. And now with the resurgences, we have to go backwards and kind of do the things that we were doing before and get back being involved. Again, one message from everybody, from the police, from the coaches, from the parents. Start them out as soon as they can understand and keep that message going until they're adults, until they've gone past that critical era.
Thanks. Joe, I'd like to move to you if you don't mind, and specifically any programs with the Sheriff's Department that you all talk about around school safety, if that's a concern in the county, anything that you feel is important for this audience, it would be more than welcome.
Certainly. Thank you, Mike, and thank you for inviting me to this forum. Here in the town of Pembroke, I am privileged to be the county sheriff here in Plymouth County. I've been the sheriff for the last 10 years, and during my tenure as the sheriff, I have seen what Senator DiMacedo correctly characterizes as an epidemic with opiate abuse. And as Chief Wall points out, it is not following the traditional, what we're used to from back in the 70s watching the TV shows. As he says, it affects everybody. And I look out across the crowd, and some people I know and some people I don't. But one thing I think I can safely say as we sit here today is that all of us, either directly or through somebody we know, is going to be affected by this crisis. So as Senator DiMacedo says, we have to hit this head on. To your question, you would ask me about some preventative programs. The Sheriff's Office has a lot of great preventative programs and a lot of great recovery programs. The unfortunate thing is, to take advantage of most of the programs that we offer, you have to become incarcerated. You have to end up in jail. And this is a good and a bad thing. I think it's good in the sense that it gives us a nice model that we can use on the outside of the prison, which can be very helpful. We've seen, as Vinnie points out, virtually 80% or more of our individuals that are currently doing time at the Plymouth County Correctional Facility are somehow drug involved. And the questions that used to be asked of me when I would travel around, how many inmates are there for drug crimes? And I used to think about that in a fairly traditional way, people that were there for dealing drugs, possession of drugs, manufacture of drugs. And that percentage was not huge, but it was significant. But as I've gone and learned, and as Senator DiMacedo said, I am also a member of the Governor's Opiate Task Force, and that has been a tremendous education for me. I've come to look at this in a different way. And so when people, if anybody here tonight wants to talk to me about the numbers of inmates that are there based on drug offenses, my answer is vastly different than it used to be. My answer is that most of them are there, either because of those traditional drug crimes or because they are committing property crimes and crimes of violence, either to get access to drugs or to get access to valuables or money to obtain further drugs, and doing things under the influence of drugs that they would never, ever otherwise do. The traditional profile of a drug addict is no longer valid. Could be anybody. And as we correctly point out, it's not just inner city problems and skid row bums and living under bridges that you see this type of thing. What you see is it happening in families, and in good families. We all know somebody or are related to somebody who's dealing with this issue right now. There are many roads to drug addiction. And some of those roads, it's important, as the chief and the senator say, that we have these education programs in school. And we educate our students on what to look for and how bad and what a risk it is to play around with any of these substances. But I think it's equally important, and perhaps overlooked oftentimes, that I think we need to provide a lot of education and awareness to our medical community and our pharmacists. How many of us have been to the dentist and had wisdom teeth extracted, only to be given, as you walk out the door, a prescription for opiate painkillers, whether or not you need them? I know it's happened to me. I didn't want them. I was given it. I didn't take them. And I think that's largely the case with most people that get those things. But there they are. And if I wasn't going to take them and they sat around in my house, the risk was that somebody would. Or change that around. You have a young athlete, and we've mentioned that even athletes are subject to these things now, and they sustain some sort of a sports injury, playing whatever sport it is they love. And when they go to see the doctor will do whatever procedures are necessary, but as they're leaving, in order to alleviate the pain that some of these individuals are experiencing, these kids, the doctor is going to give them a prescription for opiate painkillers. And we're not counseling those youngsters, or the parents for that matter, in the dangers of perhaps taking those opiate painkillers. And in some instances, I'll be the first person to say that they may be necessary, but they're certainly not necessary in the numbers that we're seeing them prescribed. So I think we need to educate, we need to work on our medical providers, our doctors. And as part of the Governor's Opiate Task Force, I've had an opportunity to hear from many physicians who came and made presentations to the group. I have heard from representatives from the Massachusetts Medical Society, and they all indicated that medical schools will vary, but they aren't doing very much. That's the one thing that they seem to agree upon. on educating our care providers and how best to prescribe those opiate medications, because they are essentially giving somebody a loaded gun as they walk out the door in some instances. And the other part of that is, I think, very problematic is when you get the sense from a medical provider that this is, I'm prescribing this to you because, number one, you need it, and number two, this is good. That's what we're telling our kids. That's what I would have thought before my education at the task force, or the governor's opiate task force. So we're telling these kids that this is something that is desirable, that you should really think about using this, whether or not you need it. I think we need to educate, as I said, our medical providers to realize that you need to counsel parents, you need to counsel the students, because what can happen is when that prescription runs out, and we see it countless times, and I know that the chief has seen it, and I know the district attorney has prosecuted it, you get these good kids from good homes who are athletes and great students who are all of a sudden cut off, addicted without even knowing it, to these opiate painkillers. And then they end up turning to other alternatives. And what is the other alternative when you can't get the OxyContin because it's $1 a milligram on the street? You turn to heroin because it's cheap, and you achieve the same result. So that is, I think, what's different now about the epidemic that we face. So I do agree that the DARE program that has worked in the past, and I know there are people that say that it doesn't, but from where I sit, not just as a sheriff, but as a parent, how can information to our kids and positive interaction with our police be a bad thing under any circumstance? I think it is a good thing, and it needs to come back, and that's going to be one of the recommendations that I am going to make to the governor on this task force. So I think that's crucial. Information is key. So educate our kids. As parents, we want to be involved and educated as well, but we also want to educate our healthcare providers. I hope that's been responsive to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Tim, I'll move down the line to you. Do you have similar concerns with teams? Is there anything that hasn't been already said by the previous three gentlemen in front of you?
Well, they were very comprehensive, but there's always a little bit more to say, I think, unfortunately, about this issue. You know, I've been the district attorney now for the last 13 and a half years, and I've watched the epidemic grow, and I am a firm believer in that the individuals that deserve to be in jail are the drug dealers who are not users, but they're selling this stuff, and they're hurting our kids, and our kids are getting hooked on these drugs, and it's changing their lives. And we need to make sure that the individuals who are out there making money off of this, and that's what it is, that they are removed from the streets to keep everybody else safe. We've had, you know, since we check numbers in the DA's office. I have state police that work for me, and we are involved in every unattended death that occurs in Plymouth County. That means that if somebody passes away and they're not in a hospital, they're not in an institution, if somebody passes at your home, the state police will show up with the local police and investigate and make sure that there's nothing suspicious. So what we find many times is individuals who have passed away from the drug overdoses. And since 2008, which was the decrim of less than an ounce of marijuana, every single year since then but one, there's been an increase in fatal opiate unattended death overdoses in Plymouth County. Last year we had, in the county, unattended deaths that were found by the state police, 75 individuals who passed in our county. As I sit here now, a third of the way through 2015, we have 49. We had one today. And we have them virtually almost every day, it seems. And it just keeps on escalating. And this is notwithstanding the fact that I think a lot of good people are out there and trying to work together to make sure that we can make sure that the law enforcement has Narcan. And we provided a seminar to get Narcan to our police officers who may show up and find somebody and save somebody's life. Because that's what it is. It's saving these kids' lives. And unfortunately, we end up seeing kids who are hooked in these drugs, and the drugs, as the sheriff said, nowadays are incredibly cheap and incredibly pure. Heroin, for instance, is a lot of people go from prescription medication, whether it be OxyContin, oxycodone, and then they can't afford it, as the sheriff said. Usually an 80 milligram tablet of Oxy's, $80 in the street, even though it's probably costs $4 altogether, if really. But it gets very expensive. kids will then go to heroin. Now, back when I was a young prosecutor back in the 80s, the purity of heroin was roughly 18 to 20%. It was cut down by the dealers. They put in more inositol, vitamin B product, to make more from less so they could sell more. The heroin on the street nowadays, 90, 95% pure. And the kids that are using heroin, they want that rush. And when you talk to doctors, and I was talking to a gentleman from my office here tonight, when you talk to some of the doctors that are at the ERs, when these kids find out who overdosed but was not fatal, the kids that are using the drugs, they want that drug. They want to get close to the line. They want that rush. In Brockton Hospital, and this is just this year, in January of this year, there were 93 overdoses. In February, at Brockton Hospital only, 48. March, 61. Every day, somebody's walking into that hospital. You know, knock on wood that the firefighters, EMTs, police officers have Narcan and have been able to save an awful lot of people's lives. And the great work by the docs at the ER also. But it is truly a dangerous world out there right now. And we need to make sure that we look at this as what it is. It's a much bigger issue than just criminal justice, programs that the sheriff may have or that we may have in the DA's office. I agree with education. It's incredibly important. I'm glad to hear that the sheriff's going to talk to that council about getting deer back in schools. Every summer we do a drug education camp here in Plymouth County. And we have still 16 towns that do have some form of deer education in the schools, which is great. But the problem has been funding. You know, it used to be back in the old days, the state would fund these drug education camps. We fund it now, or the majority of it now, in Plymouth County through our drug forfeiture money. So when we prosecute drug dealers, we're allowed to take their monies, take their cars and sell them, take that money, turn it around, put it back into the community. And we do that every summer, you know, for the drug education camp. Making sure that some kids can have a good time, understand that police are your friends. It's important to have police, in my opinion, resource officers is very important. It's important to have that relationship, and it's important for the kids to know what's out there. And we need to make sure that we continue to do that. And I think that, you know, when we deal with, whether it be drug courts that we have to help the kids that we can help, and we have one in Plymouth, we'll be getting one in Brockton, making sure that we can get help to the kids that need the help. But also understand, at some point you cross that line too. And when the kids are crossing that line and stealing cars and breaking into homes, they have to be held accountable. But they also have to get the help. And that's what, some people think drug court may be a get out of jail free pass. It really isn't. Some kids go to jail from that. Get the treatment that the sheriff would offer them. And then when they come back out, they'll be on probation. And they're trying to get them the help that they need so that we don't create somebody who's going to be in that terribly addictive life. I think the challenges are out there. I think they continue as we sit here right now. But we have a lot of really good people who understand that and who are working together. And I've seen this coalition come together. We've come a long way since, I think, 12, 13 years ago when I spoke to the woman that created Learn to Cope, who's out here today. And she was telling me her story back then about her son, the problems that he had. Great athlete, hurt his back, got hooked on medications, and then where he ended up. And I think that by working together and by having communication, it's incredibly important to make sure that we can let our kids know that we're there, that we're with them, we have good communications. One of the things I always say at DARE graduations when I go to the schools is, you know, what's so important to me is having communication, parents with their kids. You know, talking to our kids, staying involved in their lives. It sounds like something that's so nominal, but with all of our kids on texting and playing games and all this other stuff, it's so incredibly important to have that communication. And I think that you people, I know you're the quiet. I don't have to tell you that. That's why you're here. But to make sure that the people that aren't here, or maybe the people that are watching at home, make sure that the kids understand their parents are behind them and they can get the help that they need.
And I think it's not just their parents, it's the community as a whole, and that's something that we're trying to do and work with Rick and his force on as well. You touched on this a little bit, Tim. You mentioned the decriminalization of marijuana. But I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that, because it's something that I'm worried about as a parent. I think it could, and please tell me if you disagree, it could have a similar effect on the minds of some of our kids as getting the OxyContins from the doctor, right? That, well, it's okay, it's not that bad. So I'm interested to see where that comes up in your day-to-day life.
Well, make no mistake about it, legalization of marijuana, people are going to try to have that passed here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Last summer, I'm on the board of the National District Attorneys Association, and last summer I was out with the Essex DA, John Blodgett, and we were in our summer conference in Denver, Colorado. Colorado has legalized marijuana. So we went into one of the legalized marijuana stores. And to hear the people that are out there that are pushing this say that they're not targeting kids, it just didn't look like that to me. When I saw gummy bears and Swedish fish, when I saw brownies and chocolate milk with high levels of THC, when you walked into the door of the place and it has these containers that you can smell the buds of marijuana in there, and it literally was like going to the gas station. You could get medicinal marijuana strength, you could get low test, medium test, high test. You could pay more per gram for each one of those drugs. When we talked to the District Attorney of Denver and other DAs who are out there, and they're not all on the same page on this, but it was interesting to talk about the problems that they were having with the legalization of marijuana and the issues that they were continuing to have. And that they talked of how they had an inordinate number of animals dying because people are eating half a brownie and then giving it to their dogs and their cats. They talked about the fact that although it's not legal to smoke it in public, although everybody is smoking it in public, you could grow it legally in your home. And because of the fact it's still a federal offense, they can't use credit cards because that would be dealing with transactions that would cross between states. So it's an all-cash business. So as of last July, I think there were 16, I might mix my numbers up, 16 or 12 armed home invasions, fatal home invasions, where people were being robbed because the individuals knew who was growing the marijuana and also knew who had the cash. And they also had, I think, a dozen homes or so blow up from butane burners because people don't know what they're doing, trying to make hash, and they're blowing their homes up. So that was a little taste. And then you walk down the corridors of Denver, and you would see this group of kids who just hold signs up, need money for weed, and absolutely no ambition. It affects, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical doctor, I just talk to people that are. It affects their brains, it affects their ability to go forward in their lives. It's important for us, I believe, to try to get out in front of this and make sure that it doesn't pass here in Massachusetts. Our kids have a tough enough time as it is right now. There are too many challenges in this world right now. And we need to make sure that they don't need this one either. And I think now there's actually, originally I would have said 2 years ago, this is going to pass and there's nothing you can do about it. The DAs tried to get in front of the decrim a few years back, and we were steamrolled by the powers that be. I don't feel that now. I think a lot of people are against this. They see what's going on, they see the change. There's a lot more talk about the development of the young brain and how it doesn't really develop for young men, especially into your mid-20s or so. We need to make sure that people understand that, and I think we need to make that fight. I think it's a worthwhile fight, and it's a worthwhile fight for our kids.
I'd like to follow up on that if I could. I agree with everything the district attorney has said, and thinking back to when the decriminalization of marijuana was first proposed, unlike the district attorneys, not all the sheriffs were against it. I was, and we had some speakers that had come to our meetings, the sheriff's meetings, and try to make the case for the medicinal uses and the decriminalization and how this would be a good thing for society. I think it was a tragic mistake that we've made, and for many reasons, many of which were outlined by the district attorney. But I think first and foremost, the message that we send, not simply by decriminalizing, but referring to this as a medicine of some kind. You know, this is good for me, I should be doing this. That's absolutely the wrong message to send. And I mentioned before, we have a lot of drug rehabilitation programs, and we do a lot of detox down at the jail, as you can imagine. I'd like to see a lot of those programs moved outside so that more people can avail themselves of that. This is another thing I'll take up with the task force, but having spoken to many of the individuals who are in our drug treatment programs within the correctional facility, these are individuals who've been convicted of serious crimes and are doing serious time. Having spoken to them, I ask them the question all the time, you know, where did nobody sets out to be a junkie, but how did you get started? And invariably, the place they begin is marijuana. And asking them, do you feel that led you to other drugs? Some disagree with that, and some agree with that. I am a firm believer that marijuana is a gateway drug. But I will tell you this, from all of the individuals that I've spoken to, is, you know, yes, it's true that not every marijuana user becomes a heroin addict, but every heroin addict started out with marijuana. So I know what I see, and what I see as marijuana is a bad idea. And I think everything that Tim said is absolutely true. And I'm going to do everything I can to prevent any further loss or foothold for legalization of marijuana in Massachusetts, not here.
Vinny?
Thank you, Mike. This, as you can imagine, has risen to the light in the legislature. As a matter of fact, the Senate President put together a task force to talk about what it would be like if it were to pass. And it's an interesting conversation. It is going to be on the ballot in 2016. It is a real issue that we all have to start to educate people about, and the sheriff and the district attorney did a great job of explaining it. Well, one statistic I've learned that I think is pretty interesting is that a lot of people think, it was the 70s, in the 70s, I smoked pot, nothing really happened to me. The THC content in marijuana is far different than it was in the 70s than it is today. In many cases, up to 10 times more potent. 10 times more potent than it was back in the 70s. And so the reality is the effect on the mind, the effect on the brain is that much more significant. And that is something that you have to be concerned about. And so for me, this is an important issue that we all need to understand. If we're talking about the heroin epidemic and the concerns of people, destroying their lives, the reality is getting high on a regular basis is probably not the best message that we should be sending to our young kids, who we are telling don't get high with with Percocets or Oxycontins or heroin because it's a bad thing. Well, we should draw the line in the sand far away so that they don't end up in a situation where this is the logical, I'd say logical conclusion, but the reality is that it is, I believe, a gateway drug. And so it's a tough conversation. I know a lot of people may disagree with me, but I am going to do and say whatever I can to make sure that this is not legal in 2016. There's a lot of money that's going to come in across the nation to try, because they think Massachusetts is a ripe target, and I think that we as a society better in Massachusetts turn back and say, no, it's not the place. It's not going to happen here in Massachusetts. We're not going to be the next Denver or the next Amsterdam. It's not a pretty sight. And so to that extent, thank you for asking the question. And I know this is a heroin forum, but this is something that this is a drug, and it's a conversation we need to have.
Might as well chime in. I was disappointed when the state enacted the medical marijuana. You got to deal with kids in black and white messages. Either it's on or it's off. You can or you can't. The message has to be black and white, and it has to be consistent. So now the state's telling people that marijuana, which is a renowned recreational drug, is now considered medical in some situations. Well, the correlation I see is the opioids are medical drugs that are now considered recreational in some situations. It's the same message. And I think it's a poor message that we put out there. It's confusing our young people. It's hard to deal with. Pembroke enacted a bylaw immediately after this took place to prohibit the consumption of any medical marijuana, any other medical marijuana in public places, because it's not something that I can deal with as a law enforcement official. I can't be trying to help people on one end and having to turn a blind eye to something I know that is going to be causing problems to our citizens. So I think it's a terrible message that the state, they allow medical marijuana, yet they want to have a task force on opioids. It's the same problem. It's the same message.
Thanks, guys. Rick, I'm going to let you off the hook for this last question because you just gave me your answer ahead of time. If I could ask each of you, I'll start with you, Vinny, and we could skip to Joe and then Tim. Just the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about giving parents tips on this subject, and this could be your personal belief or something you've come across in your work for sure, but what would that tip be? Vinny, you can go first if you have one.
My apologies. Can you repeat, because I didn't get the whole...
No problem. So the question is, if the first thing that comes to your mind when you talk about, we have a lot of parents here, We've given them the state of the state and some of the local statistics and things you guys are thinking about. But what about when you think about these parents? What's one tip that you'd want to give them? Maybe it's about talking to their kids. Maybe it's about being in the know about opiates or whatever it is. What's running through your mind?
Just, as a father of three kids, 16, 18, and 21, talk to them. Talk to them about this. This is, don't ignore this. This isn't happening. Not my kid. My kid would never do this. Talk to them about it all the time. Be in their lives. Make as much of it. And that's not going to say that's going to solve the problem. But the fact that the kids see you engaged and interested in their lives, and that you're talking to them on a regular basis of the dangers of opiates, and I'm talking the opiates that are sitting in your medicine cabinets, how dangerous those are. I as Joe shared, my daughters 15 and 17 both had their wisdom teeth out. They both walked out with a full prescription, 10-day prescription of oxycodone, both of them. And of course, I had been dealing with this for quite some time, so that was 5 years ago, and I knew what was going on, and I was furious, and I went back and told them, we don't want this. Tylenol, 800 milligram. That's all I want. And the doctor thought I was crazy, or the dentist. But I was concerned because I heard enough about it. So, the message is talk about how addictive these things, the prescription things, can be, and try to figure out. And you're going to hear a little presentation about hidden in plain sight. Those are some great tips to find out, because these kids, they're on the text. We don't see half of it. I don't care how diligent a parent you are, and I think I'm a pretty diligent parent. But what they're texting and doing and Snapchatting, you're not seeing a lot of these things. And so it's be involved in their lives and let them know that you're watching and that you care. It happens to everyone, and your kid is not immune.
Oh, okay, sure.
Sir, Mike. I agree. Every kid out there is going to get exposed. It's just going to happen. They're going to be exposed. They have friends, they're in school, in the community, and whatever information or misinformation they can get off the internet. All you can do to counter that is give them the right information, give them the right message, talk to them. You have to give them that information. You got to counter that. That's on you. We can only do so much, and I'll tell you, I won't be able to arrest enough people to make an appreciable difference, the difference that you can do with your kids at home. So be the right information. Give them the information.
Thanks, Chief. I think the advice that the Senator and the Chief give is extremely important. And I'm speaking not just as a sheriff. As I said before, I'm a father of two daughters, 13 and 7. So with the kids, I guess you could say I'm on the front line. And every day I worry about what happens at school and what happens with their friends. And the days are gone that this issue affected only the bad kids. It affects all of us. I talked about some of those rehabilitative programs that we have in the jail, and I'd like to see many of those emulated on the outside so that you don't have to end up in jail to take part in those. But something that in my time as sheriff, occasionally I will be out in the community. I'll be at Walmart or I'll be at a sporting event, and someone will recognize me and come up and they'll say, "Oh, you're the sheriff, and it's nice to meet you, and I'm so happy that my son or my daughter is with you." And in the past, what that's usually meant is that they're recently started a career as a corrections officer or a counselor at the jail. But a couple of times in the recent past, I've been shocked by parents who were informing me that they were happy that their child was with me as an inmate. And while that's counterintuitive on its face, you stop and think about it. The way they explained it to me, and it did make sense, was that they knew for the period of time that their child was in the correctional facility, number one, they were safe. They were not going to be able to get the access to the drugs like they could on the street. And number two, that they would be participating in those programs. So I think that's one of the best things that we can do is get out there and get those programs that are working for us in the correctional facilities outside and available to people without having to go to jail or ruin people's lives with criminal records. But the theme that I get from the senator and from the chief, talk to your kids, that's very important. But the other side is also very important. My grandfather always, he was a great one for adages. And one of the things that he said to me when I was a kid, and I remember it because it was interesting and makes sense to me now, was God gave you one mouth and two ears. Maintain the ratio. And what I mean by that is listen. As important as what we say to our kids is what they say back to us. Because many times what they say isn't necessarily what it appears to be. So the best advice I could give is to listen at least as hard as you talk. And I think that's the best advice I can give. And pray. That's the other thing that I do as well.
And I would just chirp in and probably agree with everything they've just said. But when I go to schools, and I go to schools all across the county for a variety of issues, we have a lot of programs that we do, whether it be internet safety, social host programs, prom and prom graduation evening things, where kids that want to go to the prom, they can't buy their ticket unless they can listen to me and the chief and some other people, and they have to come with a parent and listen to those things. And I think the biggest thing is being a parent and not being their friend. My kids are older than my kids are 24 and 22. But when they were younger, I'd always say, I want them to be my friend too when they're about 25 or 26. Because then to that point, they're my kids. And they're going to do what I tell them to do as best as I can. Because of the fact that there are too many people that want to be friends with their kids. And I think that really creates an issue. And when we talk about social hosts, and I remember going to a town here in Massachusetts, or in Plymouth County, and we were doing a social host program. What that is basically, like I said, the kids have to come to it and listen with their parent about underage drinking, and usually it's at prom time. And we'll talk about, social hosts, the civil liabilities that parents may face if they have a party at their house and they give alcohol to the kids. There's always that parent that wants to be the friend. I'm going to take everybody's keys. Nobody's going anywhere. Trust me, these kids are way smarter than us. They're going to give you the wrong set of keys. And somebody's going to get in the car and somebody's going to get hurt. And so I remember a woman came up to me after we did our whole spiel, and she said to me, "Oh, this is a great year. My daughter's going to her junior prom, and all the kids are going on a bus, and they're going to the Westin Hotel in Boston," which I couldn't believe, actually, that kids from the South Shore were actually going to take a bus and go to the Westin Copley Plaza. And she was, "I'm thinking of getting a room for her and her friends, and just give them I'm going to get the room next to them. I'm going to give them their own quiet time. Let them do what they want to do in there." I said, "That's such a mistake, because you think back to when you were teenagers. What were you doing? Make sure that our kids understand that it's not do as I say unless I'm doing the same thing, and I'm being careful, and I'm being a good example for them, because the kids are going to be kids. They're young, they're experimental. That's what kids do, and we all know that. So let's make sure that our kids understand that it's not cool to drink and drive. It's not cool to smoke marijuana and walk down the street. It doesn't help you get a good job. It doesn't help you get a good career. It doesn't help you when you do something stupid on the internet and you write something that goes out there forever, and you're always going to be carrying that, and you can never get rid of it. Let's be parents to our kids, and let's be friends when they get older."
Thanks. So I'd like to open up the last 5 or so minutes for Q&A for any of you to the panel. There's a microphone right over there. Sorry. We had 2, but this one wasn't working, so we had to swap.
These are wireless. We can give one.
This one is?
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Tammy Burke. I'm a nurse. I work for the Alosa Foundation in Boston. We're a nonprofit funded through the Department of Public Health. And our initiative is to see providers to talk just about this, about the opioid addiction. And one of the main things that I've been seeing out there is we're trying to bring them other ways to treat pain. Excuse me. Through either tricyclids or NSAIDs, acupuncture, any other way. We're seeing a lot of pushback from the providers because it's going to cause them more time. So what are your thoughts about that? and this is our main initiative to try to fight that, but we are seeing a lot of pushback. We want them to prescribe less pills. That's another big thing.
My thought is, who cares about their time at that point?
But, no, I agree. This is what we're up against out there as part of, fighting off this addiction problem.
Well, you want to go first? First off, I want to thank you for your efforts in this crisis. And my experience is somewhat limited, but I've been surprised a little bit. And the physicians that I've spoken to universally mean well, but don't seem to have a grasp as to what it is that's going on outside of the walls of the hospital. So I agree, they are very prepared to give opiates when they're not necessarily that necessary for the treatment. So I think we need, as I said before, the education component at medical school, or their continuing education, their CEU credits that they get, that we should be concentrating on those things. And understand that, putting somebody onto an opiate is not necessarily a medical endpoint. One of the things, we have a couple of doctors on the governor's task force, and at first they said something that really was surprising to me. They considered it to be a success when they get someone who is on heroin onto Suboxone or methadone, and that was a success. And I think you can't look at Suboxone or methadone as endpoints. That's not, we can't declare victory at that point. What you want is abstinence. You want these people off drugs. And I think the best way to do that, most physicians, I'd say virtually all, mean well and want to do right by their patients. But I think we have to educate them, as I said before. And I think that's one of the most important things that I'm going to bring to the task force.
And we're trying to get them to write scripts for like a 5-day instead of a 10, 20, and 30-day or 30 pills. And these pills, as you mentioned, are left over in the cabinets. And I have an article that I'm going to give to Mike, if he can put it on the website, that talks about disposing of these, because a 12th grade student is more high risk to become addicted, because then they're going off to college, and I know we discussed this earlier, where they're not being watched as much, and this addiction happens then when they run out of the pills, then they're turning to the heroin and everything else on the streets. So don't be afraid as parents to just say, I don't need 10 days, 15 days, a couple days is usually enough to cover the pain that these kids are experiencing.
One of the ideas I've seen proposed, and it was a good one, if you've ever had the Z-Pack, the antibiotics when you have a bad flu, the Z-Pack, it's a blister pack, and what it does, it starts off with a high dose and gradually goes down. And there's some talk that maybe that's how opiates could be dispensed. At the front end of a surgery, you may have a need for those, but afterwards you won't, and maybe Tylenol will be all you need. And I think there's some great ideas, and these are the other things. I cut the chief off.
Rick,
I'm sorry.
do you have some?
Disposal in the lobby of the Pembroke Police Station, through a program with Sheriff McDonald and DA Cruz, we have a disposal box. We have an RX box that you can bring all of your prescription medications in that are unused or unwanted, and get rid of them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I've taken in probably 600 pounds already. Wow. We package it up, drive it down to Haverhill, and have it incinerated. It stays out of the ecosystem, but more importantly, it stays out of the community. Right. There's cameras in the lobby. We don't care. We don't, just go in and take care of it. And I would say that for the parents out there that want to exercise that good example, as D.A. Cruz said, go through your medicine cabinet, explain to your kids that these were, the pain pills and everything else that we had, but we didn't need them. And then, especially the younger kids, bring them to the station and make them part of that process of getting rid of them, so that you're exercising that good choice. And I think that's really important. And
if you can't get down there, we teach them to dispose of them in coffee grounds. Put them in coffee grounds when they're used coffee grounds. It dissolves the medication into the coffee ground, and then you can throw it away.
And the drug boxes, we were able to get them in all the police departments in Plymouth County. So if you go and buy that, you can get rid of it. And the other issue was, say your grandparents, if they had the medication at their homes, not necessarily your grandkids, but if their friends showed up and they went to the bathroom and I saw those extra pills, it's really important to get rid of them, as everybody says, as we all know. And I think that's a good step.
Right. Thank you.
also sounds like a good lesson for the doctors too, to see how much of this medication is not being used for the people that are doing the right thing with it.
I just had a question for Sheriff McDonald. I know you do locker searches at various different high schools, and I was just wondering if you could share with us, what are some of the things that kids are sneaking into school, and what do you find in their lockers?
Well, we do assist the towns. We don't do this on our own. Normally what would happen is we would get a call from the police chief of that town in partnership with the superintendent of schools who would want to do one of these. And what we'll do is the word would go out to all of the canine officers. The canine officers, not every town has a canine unit, but the ones that do, and our guys down at the jail, they all train together. So for our canine units, the police and the sheriff's office, these would be like gigantic training exercises for us to come in. We do it at the jail as well. We periodically do a facility-wide search. And what do we find? You'd be amazed at what we find from drugs to weapons. It's generally speaking, it's not that there's a crisis with these things, but it's something. I think if the kids are on notice that these things can take place and will take place, that they are going to be more cautious. And it's not just the lockers inside the school. We'll also have the dogs walk around in the parking lot of the school as well. And we had a situation, it's not just the kids sometimes. We had a situation where the officers were doing the search outside in the parking lot only to see one of the teachers running out the back door. That's a true story. But these things happen, and no one is immune. We have to be very vigilant and careful. I know the chief may want to add to that.
I know that Pembroke's been very proactive with the searches, and again, we're hoping not to find anything, but the message is don't bring it here, because if you do, we will find it. And I think that's a very important message that the schools put out.
Yeah, we don't find a lot of things, thank God, but when we do, it's unusual.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ryan Morgan. I'm the principal of Independence Academy, which is the recovery high school that services really the Southeast region. And I just wanted to introduce myself to the community and just let you guys know what we do. I know I took this job in August, and the school's been around for about 3.5 years, but I'm finding that there isn't really much knowledge about what we're doing. We service students in high school who are diagnosed with substance use disorders. Typically, we take students coming out of treatment, but we do take students who have not gone to treatment, but that are struggling. And so I know a lot of times when you come to programs like this, or you see programs like this, on TV, you think about, well, what can I take away from that right now? What can I do tomorrow that's going to make any kind of difference? And one thing that I can offer the community of Pembroke, and it's really just our role as the recovery high school in the region, is we have staff that are experts in substance abuse counselors, addiction counselors. We work with students daily who have been in and out of treatment. You close your eyes and you think of a recovery high school in Brockton, and you probably go back to the stereotypes of, what everybody was talking about at the beginning. We got a really good cross-section of Plymouth County, and we have students from Freetown, Lakeville, Middleborough, Situate, Stoughton, Easton. We got one student from Brockton. So it's not like, you think about like all these inner city kids that, I don't know about sending my kid to that school or something, but we really, we have a lot of students from down this way, more so than, like I said, we have one student from Brockton. But one thing that we can offer you guys is if you do have students that are struggling in your school, whether it's the high school, the middle school, we have students who have gone through treatment, who are battling addiction on a daily basis, who started out, just smoking weed. We do the intake paperwork. They started when they were 11. They started when they were 12, and their first substance was weed or alcohol. None of them, their first choice was OxyContin or heroin. It certainly does, get down that road many times, but we've had students talk to other students who are struggling, who think they're just smoking weed too, and can have a real conversation about, hey, I was a freshman, and I was going to Oliver Ames High School, and I thought I was smoking weed every day too, and I thought that was it. And then the next thing you know, I'm at a recovery high school because I, just got out of detox for shooting heroin. So before you think you're just smoking weed and you're a cool 7th grader, you might want to think about that. The other thing we can do, and we've done with other communities, we just did it recently with Carver, and I know we're going back, is they call us if a counselor at their school has an issue and they run into a student who's they've got concerns about, maybe popping up on a radar, whether it's attendance, grades, or something, and they start suspecting substance abuse. They call us and they say, hey, can you send the recovery counselor out and maybe meet with these 2 or 3 students and just kind of do some quick screeners. And they call the parents and the guardians, and they make sure it's all legit. And we meet with the kids, we do some screeners, we talk to them, we ask them questions, we interview the family, and then we really just give them, you know, kind of a recipe or, you know, a list of different things that we would suggest that they do. Not, your student has to come to our school, or, you know, your student's doomed and they need to go to treatment immediately. It could just be as simple as, you know, it sounds like they really need to get into some counseling. It sounds like they've got some underlying mental health stuff. So that's what we can offer the community. And it's something we can do starting tomorrow. So it's not, you know, what can we do and how do we get there? We're here, and we can do that. And so I would urge you to speak to your school representatives, your administration, your counselors, and just let them know, you know, I have a concern about my son. I'm concerned. Would you mind calling Independence Academy? If they don't want to, and I'm sure that they would be willing to do that, you can call us. Anybody can call us, and we're free for families. It's not like students have to pay to come to our school or anything like that, or we wouldn't charge the district to come out and do a brief evaluation of your students. So I just want to introduce myself to the community. I appreciate the time being here, and I did have some cards and some contact information up front. We also run an after-school program. I'm sorry. If you do have another student that's struggling or that was suspended for drugs, we run an after-school program, a 4-day program, and you know, that's, I would say, been very successful with kids. We take students from all over the place to come in and do like a 4-day psycho-ed program. So, like I said, there's information out there, but we're here to help you and the other communities, so, you know, please use us as a resource. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Another question?
Hi, I know most of you. I'm Julie Thompson. And Mike, I know you got involved with this because you really are into the prevention. You had a young son, and you didn't want your young son to have to go through any of this.
I think of it as a couple hundred young sons.
Exactly,
But
exactly. So clearly the message about us as parents, we have to educate our children, absolutely. But what about children mentoring other children? How do we get the good kids, even though they're all good kids, but the kids that have not gone into this yet, how do we get them to help other kids never to try a drug? Because obviously that's the goal. If you never have to try a drug, we never have to have this conversation.
I'm hoping that some of you have some more tangible knowledge of it, but the first thing that comes to mind to me was being 12 years old in a classroom at North Pembroke Elementary School and having a DARE officer come in maybe once a week or every 2 weeks for a couple of months. And for the last day of that DARE program, 4 or 5 high school seniors in high school came to talk to us. Now, all I cared about is that I knew 2 of them were on the soccer team, 1 was on the basketball team, and there was a football player, and I just wanted to know what their statistics were. But the point was, I really, really looked forward to it. And some of the things that they told us about drugs in school and things that they've been offered and have access to was scary. And it wasn't so scary that, you know, I wanted to run home and cry, but it became a reality. The other piece that came out of that, though, Julia, which I think is so important, is that, and DARE isn't going to be a cure-all or any program like that for all kids, but it might have that effect on one kid. In this case, it happened to be me, right? And I remember when they left that day, I couldn't stop thinking, I wanted to be that kid in 6 years, right? So we've talked a lot about parenting and being on top of our kids and giving them the right message. We all, of course, want our teachers to give those messages as well, but I think it does such a good service, exactly what you're talking about. I don't know another program that does that. We've, for Titans Against Drugs, we've been talking about getting some partners, some juniors in high school, juniors and seniors in high school, to figure out how we can get them involved, whether it's an in-school program of some sort or out of school. But I agree completely, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Thankfully, I did get to be that kid, right? But I think when I became that kid and got to deliver that message, that was also something that gave me a lot of confidence in the decisions that I made. And now I can trace it back to a bit about my personality, my goal setting, and sort of prioritization and things that I wanted to do with my life. And that's just a small example, but it sticks out in my mind. So, my answer is something like that through a DARE program. But I'm curious to see if there are any other ideas up there, what we can do.
I mean, I think mentoring is a huge thing, and I'm not aware of any programs that are like that, for instance, but I know that we have other similar programs where you have kids in the community trying to mentor, like some of the kids, maybe the at-risk kids, and maybe the more urban sections of our county. And I think that's definitely a worthwhile program. There's actually someone from my office tonight that I always deflect those questions to, and I think if anybody could direct me in the right position, it'd be Mr. Jacobs, who's sitting in the back of the lobby tonight, who would be able to help and put together something along those lines, because no matter what it is, little kids want to be accepted by the big kids. And whether it be the brothers or the sisters, they look up to them. And some kids don't have older brothers or sisters, so they need something like that. I think that's a great idea, and it's something to look into. So how can something like that be put together?
I will say it's the one thing that is on my resume that I've refused to ever take off. I've gotten flack from it, even from recruiters and headhunters that contact me of like, when was this? Are you part of DARE? And I say, no, I was when I was 17. And they say, no, you can only have something from your post-college days. I'm like, that's not coming off. That's something I'm proud of and I want to talk about. So those are the things that last with people more so than anything that I think most of them will learn in a classroom from DARE or anything like it. All right, no more questions, it looks like. Oh, we got one more? Oh, two more.
Good evening. It's great to see you, fellas. My name is David Glass. I represent the town of Carver tonight. I lived in Pembroke for 10 years and had 4 daughters that graduated from this very school. And I actually graduated from Silver Lake, if you believe that.
Me too.
Me too.
Not the same year I did. You're probably wondering, what is a 77-year-old man? I'm probably the oldest man here. Why am I even here, and why do I even care? Well, in Carver, the Mobilizing the Community program has been developed by Officer Dennis Rizzuto, Chief Mark Dufley, and Principal Scott Neef. We are a committee of about 15 to 20 people made up of town leadership, including selectmen and others. And we have just met, we've been organized for 2 years. We had just a recent meeting, and we've planned the events for the summer for the high school kids and the families. My question to you, but first let me preface my question by, hi Judy, I do know some people here, and it's great to see some of my friends, Michelle especially. I had the permission from Mark Dufley and Scott Neef to introduce to the Mobilizing the Community program a faith-based component. Tim Cruz was at the program that we ran at Carver High School, and we were thrilled to have a table out front representing a group that my wife and I organized 4 years ago called Harvest Inspired Ministries. And I'll just be very brief and get to my question. Harvest Inspired Ministries was born 4 years ago by 4 mothers who were praying for their sons. My wife was one of them. They continued for a number of weeks and eventually invited a number of other mothers who were affected by this horrific epidemic to join them. We have since been meeting for 4 years. We now have 35 regular members. We meet every Sunday night in West Bridgewater. Our focus is on the parents and grandparents of the addicted ones. And we've been very successful meeting every Sunday night and counseling and praying and listening. As it was mentioned, listening is a key factor to these parents who are just totally desperate, lost, and have no idea what to do. So we work with them. We're not professional counselors, but we have at least 30 of the 35 members of our group are parents of addicts or addicts themselves, recovered. So we have a lot of experience. I myself had my first date with my second wife in 1988. On that date, she told me her son dropped out of Silver Lake at the age of 16. I didn't even know how to respond to that. Dropping out of high school? Why would someone do that? And for the next 20 years, my wife and I lived the horrors that you all know about, and we dealt with every possible horror that you can imagine, with the exception of one, and that was a fatal overdose. We witnessed a number of tries, suicides, jail time, street time, dealing, selling, which prompted us to respond to the effort by the town of Carver to do something to help them about 2 years ago, when it finally became aware to the residents of Carver that we have a serious problem here. With our experience and with the success of the program that I mentioned, we felt that we would be able to help them. We have since, my wife and I and our son, you heard the bad news. The good news is he is 6 years clean and in a leadership paid position at Teen Challenge Boston. That is a miracle from what we went through. So there is hope. The mission statement that we have for Harvest Inspired Ministries is hope and compassion for those who are affected by drug addiction. So my question to you, and I'm sorry to take so much time, is what do we do for the parents and the grandparents who are suddenly involved in this nightmare and not knowing what to do? I mean, we've talked about school programs, and we have a number of programs set up for the summer for Carver Middle High School. But what about the parents and the grandparents? Debbie and I, my wife, have offered 2 support group programs at the Carver Town Library over the past year. And we've invited parents and grandparents. Now, these grandparents are taking care of their kids, and have no clue what to do and how to do it, and what resources there are available to help them. So we're trying, with the help of Selectman Dick Ward and others, to bring the message that there is hope for parents and grandparents. And we're going to be offering another 2 or 3 more seminars for parents starting this summer, and you are all welcome to join that. And I will work with Mark Dufley and Rick Wall to make sure that you and the town of Carver are available, because they are certainly welcome to join us for these programs. So my question is, I know there are programs available, and I've attended a few of them, but I'm still uncomfortable about what is available for the parents.
One of the things when the Pembroke Titans Against Drugs Coalition started was not to just look at the awareness and education, but to try and develop some of the support systems for the parents and for the families, because the families and the parents are affected just as much as the user. And they spent a lot of time putting together and looking at the different programs and finding out what they were. If somebody wasn't familiar with them, they were making phone calls to find out what does this program do. And in the last book that I saw, the support book, which hopefully will be getting out to all the cruisers and to your fire departments and available to the public, are all of those different support programs throughout the South Shore, throughout Boston and everything else, in a narrative, what they do. Because to get a list of 20 different places and then say, well, okay, we don't treat juveniles, or you know, this is for drug addiction, not alcohol, it's been broken down and kind of put into layman's terms. And I know a couple of the people spent a lot of time going over these different programs to find out exactly what they were, so that when a parent is in crisis, or even before, they can look at that and maybe make some phone calls and talk to some people in the right direction. We want to put people in the right direction.
Thank you.
So, again, I'll meet with Chief Dufley. He's a friend.
Yeah.
And I'll talk with you, and if there's things that we can, faith-based, that we can incorporate into what we already do,
Yeah.
it's another resource. And everybody listens to something a little bit different, and the message that I may be giving here may not be the right one for you, but the message you may be the right one, and it may be the support that person needs. Thank
One
you.
last thing that we'd like to do is get into the area churches and get the priests and pastors involved. They're the ones that know their congregation. And I will guarantee you that a high percentage of that congregation is being affected by what we're talking about tonight. And we are, Harvest Inspired Ministries is raring to go to help wherever we can. And a lot of people do not like to come out on a Sunday night to our meetings. They'd rather stay home and relax and get ready for Monday. But we're there every Sunday night to help. And God bless.
Thank you. Do we have one more, or?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I know, Mr. Cruz, you talked a little bit about not punishing the child and trying to get the dealers, but it seems as though the supply, I mean, heroin's like $5, right? I mean, there must be a massive amount of supply coming in here.
Yeah.
And why is that? And what is being done to change? I mean, until some of that changes, you can help everybody in the senior class and everybody in the junior class, and if there's still $5 heroin in 3 years, you're still going to have a massive problem.
Yeah, and I was at a conference in Washington last year, and they said 95% of the heroin in the United States comes through Mexico.
Yeah, that's
Comes right across the border,
Yeah.
and it shoots all across. It would go up our way up to New York, and then works over to Boston, Providence.
We
all
probably
that.
pay for the bus to get it up here.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, it's frustrating, but that really is an issue that's been not really looked at, I don't believe. I think the border security is something that needs to be looked at, with the drugs coming in, the cartels that make a ton of money on
Right.
this stuff. And even though it's cheap and inexpensive, it's volume. You know, they get it out there, and it's so pure also. So all I can deal with is what we're dealing with here, you know, from the purposes of the prosecutorial situation, and knowing that the individuals who are selling it, the non-users, the guys who are getting vast sums of heroin and distributing it to young kids, and eventually you'll see some young addict on the corner in an urban community or even in a suburban community. They'll give him 4 hits, and he'll sell 3 of them and use at a higher rate so he can keep the 4th one for himself, to use that to keep himself going to sell it, to use it, I mean. So it's an incredible problem. There needs to be bigger drug enforcement on the federal and the national level, because it's flowing into our state and it's flowing into our communities all too easy. And so all we can do is try to combat and continue the drug raids that we continue to do, trying to remove those poisons from the street. But you're right, it's almost like 1 step up and 2 steps back lots of times with all the issues and all the drugs that are out there.
And just to follow up, the sad thing is that the reason there's a supply is because there's a demand, and I wish it weren't the case, but we consume so much that's how they're making, that's how they're doing business.
Supply and demand would say that, it should be $100 a bag. If the demand was so high, they could charge more. When it gets cheap, they're trying to get it out there.
But again, it's because of volume, because of the fact that they're getting volume. Because once the one thing we know about heroin is it's very addictive. So once you get it, you're just doing it, and it's just the incredible volumes. I don't think any of us would have been here 6 or 7 years ago. We wouldn't be talking about this. But the fact that it's become so widespread is the reason we're talking about it, and that's why, you know, if the demand dried up, the supply wouldn't matter. I mean, because people wouldn't want it, even if it was there, no matter. And as you say, it's cheap. But I believe it's the fact that people still, you know, that there's a huge amount of people that just play with this stuff, and then, you know, and they get hooked. And once they get hooked, it's over. And that's, you know, that's the challenge. I wish we could control the supply, but it is, you know, if you could cut off supply, that'd be great. But the reality is you stop one, and there's another drug dealer right around the corner that's going to do, you know, they're going to sell it. There's money to be made in it, and that's the challenge that we face. But I mean, there's not an easy answer, I think, is probably the ultimate point.
My opinion is we need to continue to fight the good fight. You know, I've heard many people indicate that drugs or characterize it as a victimless crime, and I really don't believe that the scourge of drugs is a victimless crime in any sense. And I'll be the first guy to say that I think the users, the possessors of drugs, the addicts, are entitled to our sympathy and the treatment programs that we should be offering these people. But I think, going back to something Vinny, I made a note of it because it struck me at the very beginning. Senator DiMacedo said we wanted the drug dealers to go elsewhere. And I think the DA would agree with me on this. I know where that elsewhere is, and I got plenty of room. I want those drug dealers with me, inside the jail, inside the House of Correction, inside state prison facilities at the Department of Correction. I think we need to take a hammer to the drug dealers. So while I agree that the addicts, the users, the demand portion of this, we need to educate them, we need to get them treatment, we need to get them out there, we need to get them destigmatized and back into society. But I have no sympathy at all for the supply side, for the drug dealers. And as the DA points out, we need to step it up on the federal level, because it's external. But we want to do everything as law enforcement officials here to see that these drug dealers have someplace else to go. And I am volunteering to be that place.
And we need to make sure that we keep the minimum mandatory drug laws here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because they are an important prosecutorial tool to use against individuals to get more guns and drugs and violent criminals off the street. It works that way. If we go back 20 years like we did, back prior to uniformity, back to prior to consistency of sentences, it was a disaster where you could go in front of one judge and get probation, and go in front of a different judge and get 10 years in jail. We have to have uniformity, we have to have consistency, we have to go after the people who are pushing, especially heroin, because believe it or not, in Massachusetts, possession with intent to distribute Class A, which is heroin, is not a minimum mandatory. Possession to distribute Class B, cocaine, is. We need to make sure, and it's been like that forever, I don't know why. It just doesn't make sense, but that's where we're at. But the min-mans that we have for the drug traffickers, the heavyweight drug dealers, has to be held in the way that it is, because those guys, then we have some leverage against those guys. You take that away from us, we have absolutely no leverage.
We've also, in criminal justice reforms in recent years, lost some of the teeth of those minimum mandatories that the DA is referring to. We've shrunk the size of school zones, and as people know that drug offenses in school zones allow us to seek enhanced penalties on those things. So we've made those smaller, which does not make sense to me. And the reason for having those is to protect our kids in a school zone. Personally, if it were up to me, I would see the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts declared a school zone. But we need to put the teeth back into those laws that have been taken out, and we need to thoughtfully reassess what the penalties are for those people that are dealing drugs. And I think if we do that, we can come up with some good results.
We have one more? All right, last one. We've gone over.
Hi, I'm Glenn Holt. I'm part of Pembroke Titans Against Drugs. We talk about the national, the borders and not letting it in from Mexico, and that's all fine. I understand the work has to be done there. What about dealing with it in our community right now? Have there ever been any community programs, say community involvement / rewards, you know, for quietly giving up people, because there's a wealth of information out there. When I talk to kids all the time, Chief, while I've told you I talk to kids at the gym all the time, and the information that I get, it's like out there. People know who the drug dealers are. They know the kids who are in trouble. I mean, there's a wealth of information out there that we don't seem to be tapping into, even if it's just within our community. Has there ever been a reward, like a quiet reward, for someone turning in someone that turns into a prosecution and maybe gets rid of a major drug dealer in the area?
We don't have a program like that. There are tip lines and everything else. Right now, the Pembroke Police, we have 27 full-time guys. I have one detective that his job is drugs, and he does a great job. He's a member of the Old Colony Police Anti-Crime Task Force. They did a drug raid in Hanson last week. Last month, they grabbed up 3 people that had done house breaks in 27 different communities. They picked up over 500 pieces of various jewelry and everything else. So the information, we're getting information sometimes to an overload, you know, is what we can do.
I don't doubt they do a great job, believe me. It's a hard job, but it's just in the communities. I mean, people, ever since I was a kid, you know who the drug dealers are.
Right.
Not everybody knows.
And you have, like even throughout the county, I mean, we'll often get tips. And you have the next, so say somebody calls in with a tip and says, here's what's going on at this house. Watch this house for a while. You see a car pull up, person go in and out, then they're gone. Another car pull up, they'll go in and out, then they're gone. And the police have to develop probable cause in order to get themselves search warrants to get either in the house, get in the car, follow somebody, and that, unfortunately,
You're trying to make a big enough case to make it worth it. I understand.
But you also want to you want to pursue the individuals. So you want the big dealers. You don't want the small dealers, because the resources aren't there to be chasing the small dealers. To the extent that the bigger ones are, it's a bigger fish. But I think that, you know, I know that in even the smaller towns in our county, working in conjunction with the local police, I think they've made some inroads to that. But regarding whether or not there's ever a situation where somebody's going to get a reward for giving, if you're giving confidential information, you generally don't want to give your name up at all. If you call a tip line, you may say, watch 123 Main Street, and maybe the police will do that.
Just as an incentive, that's all, just to get people to actually do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think that, once again, being aware in your community, and if you have a crime watches, I know those have been very effective over time. People that are watching houses, and you're right, like the police know, but then they got to prove it, and they can't just walk in without getting an affidavit, put an affidavit together, get a search warrant together, getting subsequent arrest warrants together. There's a lot of procedures. A lot of people call it technicalities, but it's the Constitution that we work within. Sure. And I think it's effective, but if we also had more resources, I think it would be more effective.
Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.